Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, sorry about that. Good morning. Do you guys want to go ahead and let folks in?
Yeah.
Awesome. So, can everybody see and hear me? Okay, excellent. So, I realize we're right at 10 o'clock, so I won't take too much of your time before we invite Geshe down and get started, but I just want to give some super brief announcements about our programming. So this Sunday will be the last Sunday of this text on the 7-point mind training commentary. So we might go at a clip, but we will finish today. That's Geshe-la's stated goal. Next Sunday, we're going to be having the Jampe Tsenchut, the oral transmission of chanting the names of Manjushri, and Geshe-la will also give an oral transmission of 3 principal aspects of the path and a commentary. So we don't know if that commentary is going to... Oh, sorry, we have visitors today. I usually ask folks to come a bit early, but I'll have to let someone in. Pardon me just a moment. Can folks hear me?
Yep.
Okay, we have 2 visitors today, so make yourself comfortable, chair or cushion, whatever you prefer. Sorry, so just with the announcements. So I think I said next Sunday will be the Jampe Tsenchut, the chanting the names of Manjushri, and then after that we'll be taking a brief holiday break. I think it's like 9 or 10 days. And then the 29th, 30th, and 31st, Geshe-la will be giving a commentary on the inseparability of Avalokiteshvara and the spiritual teacher, composed by the 14th Dalai Lama. So I think we'll get started now. I'll invite Geshe-la down, and of course, we'll have question and answer at the end of the session. Thanks so much. Geshe-la's here, we'll get started in a moment. So, just for the folks at home, I'd like to get a sound check. Can you hear my voice okay? And you can see us? No, you can't. Okay.
That's very soft. Yeah.
Huh. Nothing's changed since last time. Let me see if I'll... How about now? Is that better?
That's better. Yeah.
Okay. Is it too loud?
No.
We should sort this out
No,
before.
not too loud.
Okay. All right. I'm going to close the blind for the sun so we're not doing musical chairs, and then we'll get started. My apologies for the delay. Do you hear Geshe-la's voice all right, everybody at home? Okay, great. Thanks so much for joining us. So first of all, Tashidele, greetings to all our Dharma friends, both here and at home. Geshe-la hopes that you are well and happy. In particular, he hopes that all is well with your Dharma practice. So it's really important at the beginning of all these sessions to tap into our motivation, to think that I'm studying and practicing the Dharma in order to improve my mind, to contribute to my own welfare as well as to the welfare of others. And another thing that's really important is one of the first teachings that the Buddhas gave, which really also is important to contemplate at the beginning of the session, which is that I have pointed the path to liberation for you, but whether you actualize that path or not depends on your own endeavor. So another thing that's really important that we can think about from this verse is also the causes of happiness are not ultimately something outside of ourselves. The true causes of happiness are something within, something internal.
Kedribla? Quiet.
I'm seeing a lot of messages coming up.
Too quiet.
Sounds okay.
Too quiet.
It is?
It's too quiet.
Is the sound okay or not?
No, not okay.
No,
No?
no, a little bit more.
Down? It's
Up.
It's at the low.
You have to talk to me. Just one of those days. Please talk to me or message me in the chat about the sound if you want it louder or down more.
Louder.
I don't know.
Louder. Louder.
Hello?
Especially Geshe-la.
Louder. Okay.
Especially Geshe-la. That's better.
Is that loud enough?
That's better. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
better?
Yeah.
All right. hopefully that's resolved. And I'll also try to kind of place myself a little closer. Maybe that'll help. All right. Yeah. So can you hear me now? No more adjustment needed? All right. Yeah, Geshe said that it's good right now. That doesn't necessarily mean it'll stay good. Of course, if there's any more major problems, please let me know. And, feel free to chime in and actually tell me, because I can hear you. Yeah, listen.
Tendicire ta shaloga chienda mandala tiani ta deshi chedun rai momo yari nga hako rawas ta ina zo ti yodo mayo deshi yodo mayo zo de ta no sel rali ba sa si wore de yares.
So that's not to deny that there are things external conditions that can contribute to our happiness. Certainly there are things that can help us. But what it means is that ultimate stable happiness is something that comes from within. So that's why we talk about those internal causes of happiness as being important.
Ta tendici nganzo ta ruri cheni leka che ate zo no ge deshi de ya page se zo no to la teni deshi ya chi leka che yares.
And so our gathering today is really kind of understanding this causes to kind of come together and cultivate together these internal causes of happiness.
Ta shiwa zo mai ba so ga ta page tendi kandi do mai se do zo
Once we are able to really engage with the teachings and develop a feeling for the practice, we'll actually come to our own conviction about this. We won't have any doubts as to the fact that the causes of true happiness are something internal.
So we're
gathering together to cultivate those causes of happiness. We're gathering together, in fact, to be able to be happy. And so as we engage with this also, we want to have some happiness within our mind. And we want to practice in a way not only that helps us secure happiness when things are going well, but also to practice in a way that allows us to transform obstacles, to transform difficult situations into the causes for happiness too. And so definitely, if, according to the Buddha's instructions, we are able to reach the state of moksha, the state of liberation, which is that state of lasting happiness where the afflictions have been cleared away, then definitely all types of minor suffering will be cleared away as well.
So in
order to begin to engage with the practice, then we want a mind that is both still and peaceful. So we'll take a few moments to do a short meditation just to kind of settle or relax the mind.
So
anything that is unsettling or troubling your mind, any distracting thoughts, just think of a gentle sunlight or wind clearing the clouds away, revealing the sky-like nature of the mind. And think that now my mind is like a beautiful, cloudless sky, whose vast and blue color is beautiful and clear.
no kan no ji tupa do reba yo mare tene ina yo shawa na tsupanda manda kari ina yo ta aposhi kivos ya to yares.
Like the sky, it is vast and unobstructed, but at the same time it has this quality of knowingness, our mind, which allows us to cognize, to understand any object of knowledge.
Se koro lumate se iza ta mgeishul dosona ane kadi ina kangi ude aji.
Because this vast fundamental nature of the mind is at the same time neutral, if we allow it to drift into what is unwholesome, this can create a character of unwholesomeness.
Geishul tembo chin dosona kadi ina yo soso kiba ye kiba kanga kibo chaya ta pagalo roto baji yares.
On the other hand, if we direct this vast but neutral nature of the mind towards what is wholesome, what is positive, we contribute to the causes of happiness for ourselves as well as to the causes of happiness for others.
Tandrigas semi yapote ta natsupala tene ta shomba to niji tembo chi shulpa tiba tigi sobaji.
So think, based upon these various characteristics of the mind that were described, as much as possible I will try to direct my mind to the wholesome qualities of love and compassion.
Rongen denye no kala yobi sonji ani joyo shirezi jizi domala subata yodo lama yodo kanga yobates ta tsichi teta yomashi sowata yo sobaji.
So now, in the place in front of you, visualize the objects of refuge, perhaps just Buddha Shakyamuni, or perhaps surrounded by the holy beings, the other yidams, such as Tara, Manjushri, all of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, and then with single-pointed awareness, make requests and supplication.
Leka tso de sosingen yapu chegi tene tel tene ta pugeshlo yomachi sene sowata yores.
Thinking from my side, I will do my best to engage with the practices. With that motivation, I request you to please grant your blessings. Sorry, the sun is shining in my face, and I think for the folks at home that's very bright, and it's also very bright for me, so I'm going to adjust again. Geshe said it's good exercise for me getting up and down all the time.
Aten kachis. Ashe tasula. Joramande.
Jidua. Oh yeah.
Pet ma jash kachu.
Jidua.
Nimat negi dio so.
No gimar. Tar. So we'll begin with the prayers and recitations. So we start on the first page, the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. Tumbo chom den de jin je ba dra jom ba yon da bar zo be sang je ba dang shab su dem ba de war she ba je den gem ba ke bu du e ga lo gyur wa la na me
Sangye chomdende pegyawa shagya tubala chazelo chede gyabsuji o tenpa chondende dejin sheba drachompa yamdaba zobe sanje reba dang shasu denpa dewa sheba jiden chenpa chebu duwe kalo gyorwa lana meba ladang minamgi tenpa sangye chondende pejawa shakya tuba la chazelo chede kyabsu chi ho tenpa chondende dejin sheba drachompa yamdaba zobe sangye reba dang shabsu denpa dewa sheba jiden chenpa chebu duwe kalo gyorwa lana meba ladang minamgi tenpa sangye chondende pejawa shakya tuba la chazelo chede kyabsu chi ho.
28. So now the short mandala offering.
Saji begi joji medo ramri rablingji Gembadi Sangye Jindu Medebuwai Jogu Namadajimla Cheparjo Idam Guru Ratna Mendalakam Niryatayami.
So Geshe will lead the refuge and bodhicitta.
Chedan soge chenam la jangchu pardu dani kyasu chi dagi chenyen gibe sonam gi drola benjir sangye drobar sho Chedan soge chenam la jangchu pardu dani kyasu chi dagi chenyen gibe sonam gi drola benjir sangye drobar sho Chedan sogi chenam la jangcho bardu dani kyabsu chi dagi chenyen gibe sonam gi drola benjir sangye drobar sho.
다 도마텔 다 가디나요. 뭐 시작하was 자와니 도메샤와 다 보게 그노 다메샤와 ngwa 호타테 같이 모레 숨기아레스.
So it's been mentioned many times before, the activities at the beginning and the activities at the end. So in the beginning we develop the proper motivation, and at the end we dedicate the positive potential.
그노 할레베 야보 얘는 초초르더니 니질 보게 전다 버튼이 테스트 좀 그요나 오프게 다 보게 겨한다 버튼 로야겠다니 롱가야레스.
So Geshe said the motivation is really nice because it's like a little bit of the method. If the actual session itself is not so great, like if we're not really able to focus or concentrate, it'll still be a source of merit, a source of benefit, because we developed that vast motivation at the beginning.
어떤 간도 샤워가 로지테치다 하고 여러 와서 어디다 지금 거지.
Huh?
세치세 longa chil se ti sona
Mhm.
shawanda wo le sona
Yeah.
rigunda wo le sona
Yeah.
ani ko se ke te ka wando go yare ke je sona
Uh-huh.
klo ya bo ya ita longa jama del ko mi te na yo ko ta ya ga chil do yare
And there's a power of a motivation even to be able to transform negative activities. So Geshe said he often told the story about the hunter and the rabbit, right? If a hunter comes in the forest asking you which way the rabbit or the deer went, if you tell them the wrong direction, but your motivation is to save that life of the animal, then the negativity of the lying, right, that becomes very minute compared to that positive intention.
nga ge ko ra joji do yong yare te ne tele page klo te ta chembo ji do ko ba lo ya shu ji ya ita dig shu che ga yare
So in this case, let's be clear, there is still a karma related to untrue speech, related to lying. However, that is something that is very small compared to that positive intention which saved the life of that animal.
o ta te du te na ta lo ji chembo mo bo yare
So there are also many other stories in the scriptures illustrating that point.
o ta te ndo lo no ale che ba te ji shan do ane lo member le che ba te ji se shi se no
And so then as we come to focus on the actual points about the motivation, we have that which allows us to distinguish a correct from a mistaken path, which is the mind of refuge. And we have that which allows us to distinguish a vast from a narrow path, which is the Mahayana mind generation.
o ta te ta ten ri page se ta chembo to chembo ji se ta ba sha ba la ta te lo yo page se la pa ko so mo bo ya ita ba che mo bo yare
And when we think about this in this way, because our mind has this vast and knowing potential, we're able to place powerful imprints for what is positive, for what is wholesome in our mind stream.
o ta ten ri ji za ta te lo page ta lu ro gu gu tu ni ta no ji le la wo ji ndo ndo tu ji ya ro was
And so, connected with this motivation, Geshe would like to lead you in a preliminary meditation today. So this is the kind of like a yogic gesture presentation of the 9-point breathing meditation. So that's what we'll do together to begin
o
today.
ta ngi ne page la pa do kan gi ko ro page sha wa she ne lo no tu ji ya re o te mai ben do tu cha le la wo ya ro was
So there's ways to do this where you do sort of the kind of yogic hand gestures as a way of kind of tapping into the awareness of the breath, but also those gestures are not essential, right? So you can also have the same steps without those physical gestures.
o ta page la bi ge yoga sa na mo de ko ro la page sha wa den ne le ta page na ro ba ni ji page ta le la wo ji ya ta tri ti di jin do gi sgan
So Geshe said it's not just kind of empty, meaningless hand gestures, right? That these hand gestures are related to profound yogic exercises which come from one of the great Mahasiddhas known as Naropa.
o ta rum ba tong bo te ta ngan zu kan ga le le chin la pe te gen de den de zo ko ya res
Yeah, so then the first step is to, I'm just going to tell you in English, I think this is the ring finger, the finger beside your pinky. You touch your thumb to this ring finger like this.
o ta cha
And then
ko ron do tu ji ya ji se ya sa res
and then face up. And Geshe is explaining that we do this to kind of activate the chakras, so the energy channels as well as the wind, the prana.
ane do ji khu chu se ne de zo ya res
And then we do a Vajra gesture, which means to fold the rest of the fingers over the thumb like this. That's step 2.
o ta ka le chin ma sha
And then the fists go downwards and we place them in our lap.
o ta ka le chin pa
And then we place the fists outwards. So, right hand underneath the arm, left hand with one finger covering the right nostril.
lu tu bo ya te ro
Breathe in through the left. Out through the right. Do this 3 times.
lu se chol pa ni ta lu zu ma se zu ma zo yo so
Think by clearing the stale wind, I am also purifying the mind.
le chi ya ta
And then place the hands in a relaxed way in your lap and focus.
ta yo ma ni pa
Second round. So again, fist downwards on the lap,
ta
pointing fists outwards, And then we do this in the opposite direction. So the left goes under the right arm, and then we use the right arm, the hand, to block the left nostril. Breathe in through the right. Out through the left. And place the hands in a relaxed way in your lap again. And the last is 3 inhalations and exhalations out both nostrils in a relaxed way. So think in this way, the chakras are open, the wind, the prana is flowing, and the 4 elements within the body are in balance. And think through this exercise, I've also tapped in to this pure and vast nature of the mind, and now I am well positioned to be able to engage with and to understand any phenomena, any object of knowledge. And now let us cultivate within our mind that thought which is the root of all happiness, which is that of all the 6 types of beings within samsara, within cyclic existence, there is not a single one that has not potentially shown me kindness. Every single one of those sentient beings is precious, is close to me. So think about the reasons of the previous lives, all these past kindnesses, and think, I'm going to cultivate an awareness that any sentient being I look at has shown me the same kindness as the person who is closest to me in this life, and in this way, hold them dear. Because they have shown me this kindness, I must give them the best possible help and benefit. At this moment, I am limited in the way that I can benefit them. Therefore, may I achieve Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. Meditate on bodhicitta.
Tandri soma noji nga se de sunji cha to gre be sen ja to ma cha to gre tel pa che she ke nyemo pa cha do chi ba de lo bo chi ren du ma ta tembo chi ma du so ma chi
And as we cultivate this mind, we may have a doubt that comes that thinks, is it really possible that the self, that this ordinary I that I possess now, can achieve enlightenment, can actualize Buddhahood? And the answer is that it is definitely possible. We know this because the afflictions, the unwholesome minds, along with their imprints, they are not the true nature of our mind. They are adventitious. They are like coverings which can be removed. So we'll pause there. Yomari. Geshe is asking me to ring the gong, and I'm like, yeah, like I think the folks at home really can't hear that. I've tried adjusting settings, but if anyone has a potential solution, please email me and we'll figure it out. But for now, just imagine you heard a gong. So Geshe said that in terms of like really being convinced that this thing called enlightenment is possible for us. Remember all of the stories in the scriptures that he's talked about in those previous classes, where the Buddha, while a bodhisattva, he first gave rise to love and compassion while he was trapped in the very lowest of realms. And if a being can bring forth love and compassion in that very limited state, then definitely as human beings we are possible of bringing forth. It is possible for us to bring forth and cultivate these minds. So any of those 6 types of beings of samsara, that means the animal beings, that means the hungry ghosts, are able to bring forth love and compassion. Then definitely with our human faculties and intelligence, we can bring forth these minds. So how does that happen, that those beings in these lower states of existence with those limited faculties are able to bring forth love and compassion? It actually relates to their previous rebirths when, as human beings, they placed the seeds of love and compassion in their mind stream. And those seeds can ripen at any time. And another reason to mention this right at the beginning is because when we first try to bring forth love and compassion, we may feel it's very limited, we may feel a little bit discouraged, but it's really important to understand that every time we do this, we put seeds, we put imprints within our continuum, and eventually they will bear fruit. And so because just saying these sweet words of love and compassion merely from our mouths without much understanding is not enough, then we need to know how to practically sort of apply the instructions for love and compassion within our lives. So then this brings us to our discussion of the text, the 7-point mind training. So Geshe said that he did, as usual, sort of a preamble, but he won't give as many remarks as usual. We're really going to try to get down to the business of the text today. So, for those of you who are maybe not familiar, just in terms of the 7-point Lojong or mind training instruction, it is said to be a brief presentation which contains the very essence of all of the Buddha's manifold teachings. And so then, of course, because before the main session, the preliminaries are very important, the text says first train in the preliminaries and gives an explanation of those. And the main thing sort of in the preliminaries, the most important point we could say is this awareness that this human rebirth is something very significant and special, and that we do not want to waste it. Yeah. And so then that is the most sort of essence of the preliminary practices. And then if we make this vaster, we come to 5. And so another way to practice the preliminary practices is to connect it with the preliminary practice system of the Lam Rim, which is known as the 6 preparatory practices. And so within those 6 practices, most of you are familiar. It involves cleaning the room, arranging the objects of worship, and so forth. There's many points to cultivate there as well. And so having done the preliminaries, then we come to the second of these points, which is actually the main body of these teachings, which is training in bodhicitta, specifically the 2 types, right? Both relative and ultimate. So we know that also in terms of training in relative and ultimate bodhicitta, the way that we train in this depends upon our faculties. So we speak about people of limited faculties and sharper faculties. For those of limited faculties, we train in relative bodhicitta first, and then we meditate on the emptiness, which is expressed as ultimate bodhicitta. But for those of sharp faculties, we actually begin by contemplating emptiness, and then having contemplated emptiness, we then direct the mind to relative bodhicitta. And then on the basis, right, of training in relative and ultimate bodhicitta, we come to the next part of the text, which is transforming difficult conditions into the path. But our ability to transform those difficult conditions into the path necessarily relates to our training in relative and ultimate bodhicitta. Yeah. And then also remember the section of the text which is the 5 powers through which we can transform our life. And remember that these 5 powers are presented from 2 angles. The first angle is the 5 powers to be practiced during this life. And the second is the 5 powers to be practiced as we come to the end of this life. And why do we have to know these powers for the end of this life right now? You might think, I have a long time left, right? But the reality is we could leave this life at any time. So it's important to understand these 5 powers as practiced at the time of death as well. Yeah. So Geshe is remembering a story with a friend of his in Dharamsala, and they were driving with one of those taxi drivers, like, in Himachal, the taxi drivers are not always so careful. And so the person was freaking out a little bit and saying, please drive carefully. I still have a lot of work to do before I go to my next life, right? Yeah. So these 5 powers during this life and these 5 powers at the time of death, these are something that are very important. And so, of course, for those joining today, you'll have to, those came in the previous classes, so Geshe explained all of those very extensively. So after this, the training in the 5 powers, what do we have? The measure of having trained the mind. The measure means, have we trained our mind or not? And the main point there was that whether we have trained it is not something that someone outside can tell us. This is something that only we can know for ourselves. And also the other point here is that when things are going well in your life, you've had a lot of success, there's nice things to eat, and the weather is fine, then it's very easy to say that I am a practitioner and I am training my mind. But of course, when we fall into the difficult situation, situations, then that can be the time where it becomes more challenging.
다 이네 쟁에 벌다 그러 체줄라 티피카 디테바이나 다 디디 베제투 토게 다 데니 디디 다야레스.
Yes, but actually it's those difficult moments. It's when things are not going the way that we want them to, when this mind training is the most valuable tool, and when we can really see if we've met that measure of having trained.
다 알게 좀 모여라스. 다 데레 다 주바 로조게 돈시.
So then the next ones are the commitments or the samaya of mind training.
다 로조게 다 돈시 버게스 돈시세는 로조 버게 야보차 바샤발라 바제 가리나 거로 버게 봉게 야지도 지냐게 야지 알아스.
So those commitments of mind training are really kind of things that we need to do to kind of abandon potential obstacles that we may be creating, and also the things that we need to take up to be able to train effectively. So that's the purpose of those commitments.
다 이니 메지 제게 다 넘발라자 tel라 다 제토는 가제이나 제게야. 네 페도요 페요 봐.
And the last one is the advice of mind training, which the translator here has translated as the precepts of mind training, but these are extra things to think about as like advice to enhance our practice.
다 카드만 로리.
And that is where we are today. So for those of you who are following along, the precepts start on page 16. Ngansu kawayo toktanilaro.
도단이들도 차이케저라 이제도 대용주지 라게 도단이를 샤와니 사한테 노징안조 치드비갈 도메샤와 타메샤와자 가서 되지 라바르 되네 아까 안 로조는 레이자
Loso.
슈케겠다니 샤 그노 군다가들 버게 타만이 되지 그 아래
So Geshe said we covered this already, but if you turn to page 16, the two tasks, one at the beginning and one at the end, usually when we talk about the beginning and the end, we talk about the motivation and the dedication. But in the context of this mind training, we talk about the beginning, a commitment not to part from bodhicitta, right? And then at the end, we think about how we have done over that day, right? We evaluate how we have done.
어다 슈케야 로니를 달 헬레 차비갈 어다 드리니 마텔라야 시야 젤 페토는 마타 네바티니 시그미 소마타 디젤 그 아래
So this can start with something really simple, right? A really simple practice, which is that when we wake up, developing the determination that I will try to benefit every being I encounter today, and if I cannot benefit them, at minimum, I will not harm them.
어다 예금이 니네체나 가제 터들링아 이에서 그 샤와데 다 젤 펜베 샤와 다 슈올 가제 터든 다 로토 바소
And so this kind of like exhortation is really just a way to kind of immediately try to place our body, speech, and mind in the direction of virtue, right at the beginning of the day.
어다 데레 타네 오 군다 따따 소마 노지 야본 로디도 먼저 따따 시서 데레 타마
And then the activity at the end, the main thing is to evaluate. Have I been able to have my activities today go according to my motivation in the morning or not? And to really be honest.
어다 베글라마 가시게다 코로 슈슈 아젠다르지 지지기 녀데리 코로 깨제시는 코로 야본 로요나 코로 칼야 버테
And so there's many sort of stories about different lamas at this part towards the end of the day, at the beginning of the evening, they'll evaluate how did my activities go according to my motivation, and then they would reward themselves with maybe something nice to eat or something nice to drink as a way of rewarding themselves for doing well.
다 야본 로먼들 다 코로 시시도네 밤마젠다지까지 또 안무지 거서
And if things did not go well, then they would take the opportunity to kind of bolster their efforts and really scold themselves and saying you absolutely didn't do well today, just as we would scold another person if we were talking to them.
다 듣게전 로차이게지 다 디고 되이다
And so now we come to the next one, Nipa Kangchung Subarjaro.
님보 고시 제바샤스
Yes, so we are at the bottom of page 16 now. Whichever of the two occurs, be patient.
다 할레베트니 다 소속 다 마세노레 다 샤와퍼스 소바카리 야포 슈바이나요 디디칼 요다 부투마니도 드니 템비톤 할레베가 자치엠보도 다 તને hombasaramro ata 다시 또 그래
So really this is an indication that when things are going well, one of the things that we don't want to do is thinking I'm meditating on emptiness or I am some sort of serious practitioner. We don't want pride or arrogance to be able to arise within the mind.
다 텔로 가토한일 원요다시 야래 데이자다 어디야 코이샤와 가리나에 다 템보메바지도 님보메바까지도 소나요 jise mombo yares.
So being too pleased with ourselves, thinking, hey, I'm pretty great, that's also not a good thing. And so when we see that arrogance may be arising in the mind, we can remind ourselves that samsara is this constant state of flux, right? That things are ephemeral and impermanent.
다요 다 버게 그거로 버게 다 할레비 바친다 버튼디 슈니를 다 저때 저 차야 그냥 저 용시 바라 왔어. 다 드릴레비 갈라 요로 좀 매봐. 내가 매봐 손으로 돈에 다 당기된 노지 앞서 손으로 또 야레스.
But similarly, when things are going badly, when things are not going the way we want, and we're getting down on ourselves, that's also something we want to avoid. So it's really important when we feel discouraged to remember things do not exist inherently. Although the situation seems solid, it is not solid, and it is changeable.
다 틴디바체 샤와니 니데 하고 살아와. 다 티게 좀 오면시. 다 티고데. 님보 소도 딜라 수.
Keep the two, even at your life's expense.
다 니세나 치긴 연락시 동치. 간도 로조 있자 로조가 동치.
So we can think of the two as being the practice and the commitments. And since this is a lojong, a text of training the mind, the commitments are the commitments and precepts of mind training.
치시 동치 선다 시워도 수문도 되네 되나 가잖아. 다 손지기 치데 니지 자와지 이자 설리나 다 내가 가세터도 가기. 펜바더던 펜바더기 펜바마더는 내가시.
So Geshe said here it mentions the commitments of Dharma in general. So we talked about like the Dharma and we talked about the commitments of mind training. It doesn't really specify what the commitments of Dharma is in the commentary here. But Geshe said that since he thinks that the very root of Dharma is compassion, and compassion is always praised first, compassion could perhaps be understood here that I will try to benefit every person I meet and relieve them of their suffering and so forth.
다 로조가 동치 다 조데 다 롱 진즈데 바과네라 하가사라 가제터데 예 진즈데 다 지야 슈체르도야 되레스.
And if we want to understand the commitments of mind training in particular in sort of in a capsule, we could say it's a commitment to be able to diminish the self-centered or self-cherishing attitude as much as possible and to enhance, to build on the attitude of cherishing others as much as possible.
다 간조 다제 여보 제바이나 다 니마지 강에이나레 거기 강에 간디지이나 조조 지대 롱 진들라 되는 용거 여봐. 아고사라 대시 춘주지이나요.
And we can kind of develop a conviction about this by having the understanding in our mind that all of the problems, from the more serious to the very minor, can be traced back to the self-cherishing attitude, and every happiness that ourselves and others experience can be traced to that attitude of cherishing others, of holding others as important. And also remember that beautiful saying by Lama Tsongkhapa here, that one who works towards the welfare of others naturally achieves their own welfare. So through helping others, we also help ourselves. And also when we understand that when we help others, we also ourselves receive benefit, that's a really clear example of dependent arising, isn't it? That's a very clear dependent arising.
다 까와서라 this 까와서라 라바샤스.
Yes, so the next one is train in the three difficulties.
다 까와서스레 tombo 녀모시와나 tombo 녀모시와 다 버게 녀모 다 템바데 까와.
아게.
녀모시 레소나 컨트롤라서 바카레 레바 이나요.
Yep.
오늘 녀모시와다 마텐네라 다 디게 녀모테 베제토야테 칼레카오.
So the first difficulty that we need to train in is that when an affliction begins to arise in our mind, we need to try to recognize that and hence apply the antidote.
And we know this
from our own experience, right? If we have an awareness of the afflictions when they first arise, like with anger, right? If we're just a little bit angry, or irritated and we think about the antidote right away, because the power of that anger is still quite small, we're very easily able to counteract it.
님보 주지지게 돼서 도야르더니 간조 마테네더니 고쇼다 chen 쇼도야.
But the problem is, because of our lack of mindfulness, what happens is we don't see the anger when it's beginning to fester in the mind. And by the time we notice it, it's already very powerful and difficult to apply the antidote.
다달로데지 아리들 캐나다 가와이나 시고 통소마스 매치몬 바사 손을
Yeah.
리서세.
So Geshe said, like, if we're too late, it's like those wildfires that we had in Canada and the US over the summer, right? We know that by the time it becomes a wildfire, it's so out of control that there's very little you can do to control it. Our anger is a bit like that.
바드 도바가 니바. 가와서는 니바 바드 도바가 세테세긴도스.
And so then, in terms of the activity in the middle, it is to try to abandon the affliction completely.
리서와
Loso.
다 타마 심문중아 다 배드 뿌야데 갈레카고 다 대도리 다제.
And the one at the end, and Geshe said this comes at the end because it's the most difficult one, is to make sure that the affliction never arises again. So you see why that comes at the end, right? That's really challenging.
다 간조 너 너지는 게제시 요리 치켄조 샤 니레 세데 듀노르 게자니 다 쪼테 니두니 아레스.
So you've probably heard that when we talk about the refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, we say that the Dharma, or the teachings, is the actual refuge. This really shows us why this is the case, because when they're cultivated, they provide us refuge from those afflictions.
다 간조를 강에 떼케가 다 녀모도 다 드리 세영양바 간이지나요. 그만노지들 빼셔기 아레스.
And so we can think, when the afflictions arise, how do we kind of get our head around how they are harmful? We can think of them as being a little bit like a thief.
리서와 다 tum바니 녀서도 다 tum보 세메 투바지. 대용요 고안을 다 녀서도 투바스나. 하고서라 그마실로 비바도 지바레스.
So if those afflictions are like the thief, right, that are stealing what is good from our mind, then when we are practicing emptiness, when we go beyond the pramana, the valid cognition, and we have the ngusu tokpa, the actual realization, that is like kicking the thief out of the house. So you found him or her and you've pushed them out the door.
하고서라 다 치유야도 요 말했더니 이나요 소승이네 단다 고대 자토요 말했어.
So because you're standing there, it's unlikely that the thief is going to be able to come back into your house. But there's still one thing that you haven't done. You haven't yet closed the door behind the thief.
하고서라 다 용용 tum바니 용용 또다 tum바니도 다 용용 고안이라 할레비타 니파처럼 로서는 고대
So when is the door closed? It's having realized that emptiness within the mind, right? We then, in meditative equipoise, become more and more familiarized with that mind of emptiness. And at the moment that we achieve the gokten, the true cessations within the Four Noble Truths, that is when the door has been closed behind.
Yeah, His
Holiness the Dalai Lama often jokes that when I achieve the true cessations, that's when I can truly relax, right? That's when the work is really done. So the next one, cultivate the three that must not decline. Towards the bottom of page 17. So when we speak about the first of these, it is speaking about the first as depending on devotion to the Guru. I like to translate this word as trust. I say depending on trust to the Guru, but you can tell me in the comments which word you prefer.
So
Geshe said that this devotion or this trust works if you have a scrupulous teacher, right? If the teacher is an ethical person who can lead you along the correct path by example. So when we And so the second of these three is on the basis of that trust, one's good practice. And then the third of them is Sumbadi Karite?
다 특제 여분 좀 맞대. 대접발라 바제메 봐.
Ale, is to be able to maintain the precepts with those good conditions so they don't decline.
간조 타위리세 발라 바제 동보대. 특집발에 타위리세 발라. 아니 소소 지시야 발라 토이 아니 소이 특제 메바데 바제지 라와스.
Ale Tunchen. And so Geshe is actually mentioning something here, I'm sorry, that I didn't see in the commentary. He said the third can also be understood as having enough of the basic necessities, the necessities of life. So like food, shelter, and so forth. And he's saying this here because he's relating it to the 4 obstacles that prevent the actualization of the Mahayana lineage. And one of those is not having enough to eat, drink, shelter, and so forth. So that's another thing you could understand as the third.
다 할레바더니 뭐때 못 잡아요 그거야 말했더니 걸어 따다지 그거야.
So Geshe is saying he's not advising us to be greedy here, right? That we want to have all of those perfect conditions, but we need to have enough to maintain our practice. So contentment here too, right?
어디 다다이는 간저 시워하고 근데 와서 이내 치드야는 내가 여기 som바도 이제 고자는 내가 여기 이내 사야도 돼야 바제 어느 디디디체들가 맞으러 와서.
And we can see that, right, like the reality of why this is important. There's lots of people in the world who have perhaps heard these teachings on love and compassion and would love to study and meditate upon them. But because they're in a state of poverty or somewhere unsafe, all of their energy has to go to just kind of getting by with the necessities of life, having enough water to drink or enough food to live and so forth.
내가 다 특전 저기르지는 되는 내가 여기 있는 특전 몇개 먹어요.
Again.
특제 간가 여기 내가 몇개 먹지.
Yeah.
다용 내가 여기를 특제 만도 너다 먹어요.
So Geshe left fleshing out how we could understand this obstacle in 2 ways, right? There's loads of people who have all of the conditions they need, the necessities of life to do spiritual practice, but they just ain't interested. Right? They just haven't even thought about love and compassion, much less wanting to cultivate them. And then you have other people that are very sincere and would love to be able to practice love and compassion really fully. But because they're just putting so much energy into getting the necessities for survival, they're not able to.
다 이나요 타그 찬요래 제바텔라 다 이니 민제 다 보게 다 동반이라고 지는 다지요 얼마도 다 손바도 이제 전주에서 소설레가 제살이 이나요 되게 또야 같이 뭐래 송이 알았어 뭐지.
So of course Geshe said, having enough time to cultivate all of these in practice, that's an important consideration. But also to remind you that maybe using emptiness when we're not so familiar might be a little bit difficult, but especially in terms of love and compassion, there are many ways to cultivate these in our daily lives, in our workplace, as we work to sustain ourselves.
다 지서 된로 차와시 다 니송아 다 놈바메 바 노스 곰스
Ale, nyambam.
소도 따자야 말아.
Nanso shokjang katsuri.
또 제주노 된디와.
Chusum chujije. Okay, yep. So now, as we come to the next one, cultivate the 3 that must not decline.
니송아 다 동보대 대바침에 예대 통제 라미 미기라로 알리바 이자 다대 라미 미기 많이오 봐.
Yep. So, yeah, okay. So I see, Geshe, sorry, the 3 provisions that he mentioned that I didn't see in the text, that's there. So we covered those. So now we go to cultivating the 3 that must not decline.
That's it.
Loso.
다 니빠테 태제게 치 아니 하거서라와. 로중한테 로중을 보게. 뭐 진짜 파중화도 예 진짜 공부할 가와 좋아요 봐.
Di mesum dang dempar jarebe.
그래 뇽바메 봐 놓서 너니 봐.
Yeah.
다 됐다 뭐 그래서 인데는 자가 될라고.
Karisegi.
뇽바메 봐 놓서 라미 미기 많이 봐지.
Yep. Yeah. So the first thing that must not degenerate or decline is depending on the teacher.
니빠테 다 로중 뇨레셔 봐라. 좋아 많이 봐.
The second is not wanting the decline of our taste for the Mahayana Dharma, for the Dharma of the great vehicle.
다 로중 뇨레셔 봐라. 당길라 봐 놓지 동시 많이 봐. 다 참어 이치를 다 보게. 많이 봐지.
And we can understand the third here as not allowing our commitments or trainings to decline.
아까서와 녀바메바 노스티타 가디나 오고 그래스.
So that's really important to meditate on those.
어다 드링 아주마 릴라워진도 요르다스.
Yeah, and so next we come to the keep the three inseparable. So Geshe said that we covered all these together. So he gave like a big block at the beginning, and then we went through each of the main points, so you get the transmission of those. So that's how he's proceeding.
소소 뭐시 아세르 마선 여러 맛이. 더 다음에서 또 대자발다 소소 자발다 자에서 괜찮아. 다음에서 또 냠바샤.
그남라 탁두검 간소카오야. Sorry, 나라테쇼. 나 통기민데.
자, 소소 또 자잘라니 그 말에. 나를 되었다. 다음에서 또 냠바샤.
Oh yes, so keep the three inseparable.
다때도 릴라버리 링아 이 있을 때 가서 더더더니 아까서라와 다 먹게와도 타와도 다 게와도 냠바.
So that's really easy to understand. Our body, speech, and mind are the three, not mixing them with unwholesome and mixing them with what is wholesome or virtue.
리송아
로소.
다 일라 쇼메 따도 주 차도 띵조 거라지.
So the next one, meditate constantly. Kulwa namla takdu gomroa.
어느 말이죠? 소소 괜찮지. 일라 쇼메 따도 주 차도 띵조 거라지.
Ganso kawayata.
따죠 되는 게 너 예서 된다 쳐서 인디 일라 쇼메 따.
So apply the training impartially to all. It is vital that it be deep and all pervasive. Loso.
아까서라와 다 소소 녀연 바텔 다 보게 녀래 용토.
Yeah.
아니 연달을 용모토 바더니 마인 바 센체 슬리나이 다 보게 제바도 다 강가 야보죠.
So impartial means not just with the people that we like, with the people that we get along with, but also with the people that we dislike, with the people that we find difficult or that we find as our enemies.
대전도 맞아 다 로어리 주게 센체 요조들 다 넬라바 누이래 다 가서 터터 다 보게 야보.
So impartiality means really to cultivate love and compassion for all six types of sentient being without exception.
대전도 맞아 니네 지는 유인에 발라서 봤더니 레비칼에 세 마주 바 로조군 요래 템포 대토야.
And when we meet those difficult people, not to let our practice devolve, not to let our practice decline, but to maintain it.
아까서와 어다 된 요래셔도 다 돌레게 요래셔도 다 던지세요 이거 뭐 알아봤어.
And so there's many ways also to kind of enhance our ability to cultivate that in an impartial way through tonglen, through taking and giving, and so forth.
다 내가 가르치나요? 더니 레다 랜드 거게 할때 같이 뭐래서.
And also really important to understand that all of these relationships are also related to karma.
어다 센제도 다 비쳐도 내가 센제도 세제 많이 봐 가와이나요 로조 치토바 세더니 우야레스.
So in the commentary it actually says all sentient beings and insentient objects. So to be able to kind of extend that magnanimous mind to all.
세제 많이 봐 로조 녀래 간디시 그요나 데스기로 왔어요. 여보 맞지.
So Geshe says insentient objects. He's like, that's something you want to think about. Like, how do you practice mind training with a non-sentient object? He's not so sure about that.
딘디 왔지? 리송아? 야, 다 가운데서. 다
Kulwan namla takdu gom.
꼬와 너라 따드 검.
Meditate constantly on those who've been set apart.
다 소소 보게 렌드 셰케나 왔는데 요바텔 워 로조 녀래 녀로야 데 많이 봐.
So Geshe said this is actually enhancing that point. Those people that we don't like. Those people who kind of put our back up. Practicing mind training even with them.
요 지세 메닐 신내바 먹고 요데 대지가 돌었던 로조 녀래 시험 더 봤더니 많이 봐.
야보코마 송탐메.
야 소설 지세 메닐 소설 내바 시키더니 먹고 용거라 왔어. 대지라요는 로조 보게 따다 데더.
And being able to train in the mind training with even with those people who without any reason they give us difficulty or hurt for no good reason, to be able to train even with them.
다 로로 소설에 따라 파마도 때네 다 라마도 기라서 봤던데래 다 보게 로조 녀로 많이 받아가지 듣게 뭐.
But also Geshe said it's important to keep those good relationships with our spiritual teachers, with our parents, with those with whom we have a karmic affinity as well, right? We also don't want to let our mind training degenerate in relation to them.
다 여보시나 개와요 또 제가. 아니 다 내가 던지 도마다 쉬소나 냐바 쉬체가 이자
파마든 소도.
그게도 다 던지.
So with our parents, with our teachers and with people who we have a close relationship with, actually transgressing the mind training will lead to a heavier negative karma, but also when we do well, it leads to a stronger positive karma, depending on the power of the object. So that's very important.
Oh, tintibache. Ta cheje tola timushas.
So the next one, don't be dependent on external conditions.
Oh, ta tezen ta tangi kecha moshi sare. Es kala do ta desa do tri puso tsoba yobi kala loju yobu she toba. Ta ho so kange tezi tebi kala loju nyondo atri mayimba. Ta kadi ina yetembo.
So not being dependent on those external conditions, that means that, when our food and our place is comfortable, then we're able to study and practice well. But when we have a little bit of discomfort or we are a little bit ill at ease, not practicing at all.
Oh, ta zo tani loju nyole yome se no ni sha ga ya isa shi jel mata mati pa chi ga ya.
So we know that the measure of training the mind training is something internal. So we're working with something internal. And we don't want that internal transformation to be completely dependent on external conditions. This is really important.
Oh, this one?
Yeah.
Oh, tindos.
Derecho.
Tarizo nyuasalong.
This time, practice what's most important.
Ota deji halevi kachi moridas. Ta shewa tangarus shewa thuma me aisa. Hakasara shewa thuma me bane ta li jato tutam buto mombole yorten. Ta taritele koga yoga chi me so much.
So this starts out with a very important awareness, which is that when we hold past and future lives, we know we've had hundreds, thousands of lifetimes. But in all of those hundreds, thousands of lifetimes, our opportunity to practice the mind training has never been better than this one.
Oh, ta shiva tamaka ta tanda nidu yo maritene no jinga do shwa chabi kala yo soso ge shewa thuma me bane lile ba kanga lolo ge tani shwa chaga yo gewa de yo sono to no yo gewa to chiga ya.
So this awareness of all of those countless previous lives is really transformative in Buddhist practice. Even a seemingly simple practice like offering prostration, we can visualize all of those countless bodies from our countless previous lifetimes, and in that way collect a much vaster accumulation of merit.
Oh, ta chewe ji nyunji ma to yo maritene kundu zumbi cheba noji soso ge shewa tume ge ta li kangi ge ta cheba pi yo sono to na o pe chiga.
And also when we think big, it can transform other practices like making offerings as well, right? Even if we're not a wealthy person and we can only arrange very simple offerings, if we think of transforming them into offerings like Samantabhadra, those small offerings can fill the extent of space and accumulate great merit.
Oh, tinti bachi. Ta kawadu.
Deritso nyamsu lang golok nija.
Oh, kolo masha. Ta deji halevi sa.
So the next one, don't misunderstand. We're towards the bottom of 18 for those who are following. So there are 6 kind of misunderstandings that are related to this point. Misplaced patience is the first. So to bear any difficulties related to outdoing one's enemies and protecting one's friends, but not the sufferings related to Dharma practice. So Geshe said this is really being able to practice kind of no matter what situation arises. So the next one is misplaced intention. And so the intention is misplaced, where we're always kind of really interested in making sure that all of our life things go well, like our career and our success and so forth, but we don't develop that intention and that interest in our spiritual practice, right? So that's misplaced. Yeah. So Geshe said not to be extreme about understanding this misplaced intention, right? Like, oh, I shouldn't care about my work at all, because in the previous verses we already mentioned how important it is to have those basic necessities, right? Enough to eat, enough to drink, a place to stay.
Oh yeah, ta ronyo kolo.
Misplaced relish.
티소 고스가 다 로뇨 아들가 오메 바체 단제 다가 사체가 다와서나만데 거의 대화 집어는 거거든.
So that's a relishing, kind of a misplaced enjoyment. So we don't enjoy hearing, contemplating, and meditating on the teachings, but we have a great taste, we have a great relish in sort of the wonders of samsara, in those contaminated happinesses.
다 대웅더니 단지되게 대화 거의 대화 그게 요말이세요. 요말은 아주 거의 대화 맞는다. 가서 봐봐 요말 왔어.
Yeah. So that's not to say that samsaric happiness isn't important at all, right? We definitely want to have a life that's bearable.
거의 대화때 소만라고 시네 델라테니더니 코와도 만데와 타비 대화야 다 대선을 개발 미네트레스.
But look at that samsaric happiness, that worldly happiness, as a bridge that gives us the time and mental space to practice towards the happiness that is the bliss of liberation, right? That's how to think of it. So the next one is number 4, which is misplaced compassion.
디바셰발라 니지 먹어와지 깔레 치기텐데 깔레 자켓텔라 니지 시에서나 나티 니지 콜로세 아드레스.
Yeah, so that's being compassionate for people who are dharma practitioners, but not having compassion for people who do wrong or harmful things, right? We need to have compassion for those who do those wrong or harmful things as well.
다시고 돈바서 이는 두망이네 뉴켈레죠 델레죠더니 디바셰켓텔라 니지 체가 되는 거야.
And in fact, there's a common saying that the holy beings, in terms of their compassion, the compassion that they have for those who are suffering now is powerful. But their most powerful compassion is reserved from those engaged in negativities, in sinful activities, who are accumulating causes of future suffering.
당연히 저는 레오로 왔 디바 뉴케티 코롱님이 다 디비 레전드 부존도 요아르 콜뉴르도 요아르 왔 지티 저는 거 주야하게 레가지 요아르.
And that makes sense, doesn't it? The people who are suffering right now, they are actually experiencing that suffering and purifying, moving through that negative karma. Whereas people who might not be seemingly suffering but are engaged in sinful activities, they are creating causes for powerful suffering in the future.
다 딜었더니 따시세는 뭐든 간주 계시기는 파바 도메 같더니 지스 쇼망게 뭐또 뭐 처음 보지 돈에 이제시에서 왔어. 파바 도메.
Yeah.
지스 쇼마.
Yeah.
또
키.
보지 돈에 이제시에서 왔어. 니지 간디스레.
So Geshe said that if we are debating this particular point about the more powerful kind of compassion, when a sangha encountered that dog with the wound on its side and felt that compassion, was that this greater kind of compassion or the more limited kind of compassion? Was that a kind of actual pure uncompromised compassion, or was that compassion that was tainted with something worldly? Geshe said that story is one that's often debated between the monks in the debate yard. There's another question that they debate in the debating yard, which is this shepherd-like bodhicitta, which says that I am going to remain within samsara until it is empty of every last sentient being, and only then will I achieve enlightenment. Is that kind of bodhicitta really possible or not? So that's another topic of debate. But Geshe said, just spoiler alert, that type of compassion is really not possible, right? You're not going to want to wait for samsara to be totally empty until you get enlightened. Yeah. So what about the type of bodhicitta which is thinking, okay, I am going to be enlightened together with all sentient beings, right? Which is the king-like bodhicitta. Well, we know, right, from how we understand how enlightenment works and achieved, it's not going to be possible for us and all sentient beings to get enlightened together in that very same moment. So that's another thing to think about, right, in terms of, is it practically possible, these three types of bodhicitta? So the sixth one is misplaced joy. Yep. So, misplaced joy is to fail to cultivate the joy for the happiness and virtues of samsara and nirvana, but to rejoice when rivals suffer.
다 대우다 나도 치시기 이네 다 레몬 다 달레비 같이 모르다 소소가 놈이 소소가 버그 다 남아다 요아라와스 다 대지 인지 민지 다 챈들라도 야보도 거기 요아라와스
Yeah.
이나 이때도 뇽도
Uh-huh.
개와 야보 다 세게 때 야보질 로얄레 카시카레스
So then this 야보 고마송.
진니한테 깨달리라 버려도와 소소가 놈이 있네 소소가 버기 있네 가리나요 챈들라요 다 야보도 거라와스
Yeah.
하고서라 이나요 쪼대 노게 세 야보 차야
Yeah.
So
all of these points are kind of giving us a Dharma perspective, which is that as a Dharma practitioner, of course, we need to subsist in our life, which means that we need good conditions for ourselves, for our family members, the people that we're responsible for. But in addition to that, we also want to make sure that we are taking joy in training our mind. And so also if we have compassion, like true compassion, right, for our children and so forth, we will try to introduce these positive mental qualities of Dharma. So of course, if we can lead every person that we encounter to develop these qualities of love and compassion, that's the very best. But if we can start with the people close to us, with whom we have influence, that's often easier. Yeah. And so Geshe said that that's it's not really good for us to be happy when the people we like are doing well. Number 6 is also saying, but to feel happy when people that we don't like are suffering or are enduring difficulty, right? That's negative rejoicing. Yeah, so if in this lifetime, younger son na bokumasun. Yeah. Because if those people close to us, if our kids, for example, with the good conditions that we have given them, if they become someone who harms others, that's a very negative thing. Yeah. So in this way we have... No, Josun. Chasango Josun Karlak. So in this way we've covered those 6. Josun, Matua. Mata Josun. Jesu ron Jos Karlak.
Domasos koi dewa chipol tani gawa go.
Yeah. So we don't want to also rejoice wrongly here, rejoicing in the happinesses of samsara, but not rejoicing in the causes of Dharma practice. That's also very important. And so Geshe said that in terms of this joy, it's really like also a mind of rejoicing. So if we're rejoicing when an enemy encounters something difficult, that is negative rejoicing. So in this way, we've covered those 6. So the next one, don't be inconsistent. So this means continuity in our practice, that our study and practice isn't inconsistent, which means we're doing loads on certain days or at certain times and nothing at certain days or at other times. Sometimes we practice Dharma and sometimes we don't. That's what inconsistent means. Train wholeheartedly, very similar to that consistency. So wholeheartedly also means not having any doubt as to whether this mind training is something that is going to be beneficial or not. Because if we have total conviction that it's going to be beneficial, then our practice will be wholehearted. So the next one, gain freedom through discernment and analysis. So discernment and analysis, we can understand this in an easy way. This is constantly watching our behavior and discerning whether things are going well or not. It's honesty. And understanding that we need to discern the two primary things that we're trying to abandon in this practice, the self-cherishing attitude and the ignorance grasping at the self. So we gain freedom, right, by parting ourselves from those self-cherishing and the ignorance grasping at the self. Don't be boastful. So don't waste your virtues by saying how great my practice of Dharma is, what a compassionate person I am, and so forth. Don't do positive things so that others will recognize you as a good person. That should not be your primary motivation. Don't be irritable. So don't be irritable, Geshe says, means just being like a stable person. As soon as something bad happens that irritates us, lashing out in anger, try not to do that. But when things are going well, we're perfectly patient and nice, just trying to be a little bit consistent, not letting small things irritate us. So don't be temperamental, Geshe said, very similar. And so now we come to the next one. So don't be temperamental means based on the tiniest positive or negative thing, having our mood and expression completely change, trying to avoid that. Don't seek acknowledgement is the next one. So that means really don't seeking acknowledgement means when we engage in something positive, not having it tainted by those 8 worldly dharmas. Loso. Dosare. Yeah, tanganso tamadi lebs wa. Yeah, ta nigma mang. So we now come to the conclusion. Geshe is reading the verse from the conclusion. The essence of the nectar-like instructions for transforming into the path of awakening, the 5 prevalent signs of degeneration, was passed down from the one from the golden isle. And so Geshe said that the conclusion is explaining a little bit about the benefits of the text, about the benefits of the precepts and training of the mind. And we can see that the 5 degenerations are mentioned here. The 5 degenerations that are the characteristics of Kali Yuga. So degenerate time, beings, lifespan, afflictions, and view. So although times are degenerating, although attention spans and beings are getting worse and worse and worse, we have to make sure that despite that degeneration, our practice of the mind training remains consistent. So lifespan, degenerate lifespan, means actually in the Buddhist scriptures we understand that a very long time ago people had longer lifespans, and these have gradually been shortened. So understanding that even though we have less time, really making sure we use that to train our mind. So degenerate afflictions just means it's a lot easier during degenerate times for people to develop afflicted minds of irritation, anger, and so forth. And also during degenerate times, life gets a lot harder. There's a lot of things that are going on externally in the world at the same time that are possible causes of upset. So that has a place in it too. But if we can use that sort of difficult external situation as the fuel for our practice to use the Lojong teachings to transform obstacles into the path, we can actually come to benefit.
chigitawa chibo maya ba si dun den la
Yeah, yeah.
tawa du jambo den do ya
So Geshe says degenerate view, from a Dharma perspective, we have one understanding of this, but perhaps the view is that, the political considerations that people have, being willing to kind of having this view that it's okay to cause kind of chaos or whatever to come to some advantage.
ta chi sheki na ta chigitawa korongol ma de wa chi si du si shul pa sho su na ne o ta duri dun do ya
And those who are speaking the Dharma, if their Dharma becomes tainted, becomes influenced by political considerations, this is a degeneration in the view.
o ti ta ina yo zombal le ta nyo da mambo chi ta so ta ni ki ngi ya ros
And we can see actually how this is related right now to so many difficulties in the world situation.
o ta sin yo ta ndi so nga ta do so wa
Oh, Jos.
o ta te ndi ge ta me nga ta pe pa ka ni la ta nyo le yo po che te sa la ma sin ba ni me nga te ma nyo ba yo re
And so the next paragraph is just explaining how these Lojong teachings have as their source Sudvarnadvipa. So he's usually known as Serlingpa. So he is the source of these instructions, and they have remained undegenerated, going from Lama to Lama until the present time.
o ta ndi nyo le ge ta ni pan da ba din da ba tho so na la ma so du no lam du wa si ma koro ina ta na shwa ina in dan je wa mes
Yeah. So then also we understand the benefits of training the mind, that the practitioner becomes the city that is the source of happiness. There is nothing that will disturb the mind. There is only happiness.
o ta nga zo ti long ga te ka se ta ta do to na te ke so chi mo ren du was
So as much as possible, we ourselves also must try to cultivate this path of training the mind in accordance with the
o
instructions.
ta ge wa ngwa di sa re twa bi che che chi ji ga de le la ba ni bi ni ji ri chi de lo mi ke ni she yi de do go shong ju se ni jom ba sho
So then Geshe is just reading the root text. When karmic seeds left over from the former trainings were aroused in me, I felt great interest. Without regard for suffering or disparagement, I sought instructions of subduing ego clinging. Now, even in death, I have no regrets.
o lo ju de mi ni ji che che na ye ge ni go ni to wan de na te ba chu ge nan jom ba ta ba jan se ji yun de ke ni zam ba tu me ji e ni chi zo te dan de go ron de wa ti ge se jo de wa
Yeah. So sorry, I'll just read through the paragraphs quickly. Geshe read. He actually said the transmission of the text is over, but I'll just read these paragraphs for you anyway. Through the kindness of the Dharma, Lord, I received the precious treasury of this transmission. Through the power of this revelation requested by faithful disciples, may all beings come to master the two bodhicittas. This succinct commentary, based on the words of the oral lineage of the 7 points of mind training, was composed in response to requests from Drabba Gyaltsen. Listen.
o ta tin de wa ti re ma to ta zom ba ban de ko ro zom ba po de ge shi chakawa
Chekawa. Yep. And so Geshe said that we have been doing by Togme Zampo this commentary, but we know that the root text is related to the instructions of Geshe Chekawa.
ha ko sa wa so ta chaka yi ka ni ta lo ju te de ma ti nge le yo du ya re te na ma chi ge chi ngwa ni ma to o lo pe ja me wa je ta on de me wa je
So it is said that before the time of Geshe Chekawa, actually these 7 points of mind training instructions, they existed, but they were an oral lineage, a herd lineage that went from master to master and were not yet written down.
o e tan go ni te ji lo ti ja gi is
Ale. So Geshe, just to create auspicious circumstances, will read just briefly from the beginning of this commentary.
tu ji chen bo lo sha zo la me ngo de zen yin bo de si li pa ni ji ba ye do je ni ma ji shi ju de la so shi ba cha to mo ngen do ta la chi no mo lo ta ba so ma shi ri pi shi la ji nyen bo ni ju ru sa zo lo jing ngo ke jing ngo ta zo ji mi shi we cha tu le ni bo pe ma sho te ni lu la she ba sha len be ko ru ni zo o ta tu le
Yeah. So Geshe, having read the first few lines from the beginning of the text to create an auspicious connection, we shall leave it there.
o ta ji da patrin do ma se te ta ngan zo kar ma je te
So Geshe said, unfortunately, we didn't get to the 400 verses today, but that was because he really wanted to finish this Lojong text. But don't worry if you like that text, because we'll continue with the 400 verses as the second half of the teachings in the new year.
o ta lo je te de ma te ta di se o ta ha le ji bu ta te mo do ma se te ta ya ta o se
So Geshe said, in this way, we've completed the commentary of the 7 Point Lojong or mind training teachings, and he said he didn't do it kind of as detailed as he would have liked, but he hopes that we at least managed to cover the basic meaning.
ya ti che ga wing ni ke wa mo shi
So thank you very much. We will continue with the dedications. And actually, custom does dictate that since it's the end of the text, we should do a Thanksgiving mandala offering. So I will do a very short mandala offering to begin the chanting today. Saji pege joshi meto jam rirab lingji nidi gyamba di sangye shindu mide buvagi joku nanda jinla chubar sho idam guru ratna mandala kam niryatayami. Short dedications. Jangjo Semjo Rinpoche Maje Panam Jeju Chi Chewa Nyamba Meba Yang Gone Gondu Pewa Sho Tongni Tawa Rinpoche Maje Panam Jeju Chi Chewa Nyamba Meba Yang Gone Gondu Pewa Sho Jambe Bao Jidar Kyamba Tang Kundu Zambo Deyan Dejinte Deda Kungi Jesu Dalo Chir Gewa Dida Tamshe Rabdungo Dusun Shebe Gyawa Tamshe Gi Ngowa Gangla Jodu Ngabade Dagi Gewe Tsawa Dikun Kyan Zambo Joji Radu Ngowagi.
Ruje kange ta ge soba soba ji ge sai thala te ni ta zubalin thala ta madu tanro salina sombang ba tichene ta somba sombo je to.
Through the merits that we have engaged with today, both myself and others, may all those in the world possessing evil minds or negative intentions, may those be replaced with minds of loving kindness.
May all that we see so clearly with our eyes in the present moment, all of the terrible wars and conflicts in the world, be pacified through the power of these merits. Through these merits, may all of the sufferings and difficulties that I can see with my eyes, the physical difficulties of beings that I can't see, their mental illnesses and suffering, may all of these be completely cleared away. So we'll pause it there. Allez, loso. So Geshe reminding everybody, I was supposed to remind him at the beginning, but reminding everybody today that today is a very important day as well, because this is the 34th anniversary of His Holiness the Dalai Lama receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. So that's really a cause for rejoicing. So may we take His Holiness as our example, working for the peace and harmony in the world, and also working for the happiness of all 6 types of sentient beings in a really meaningful way. So another thing to understand too is that even when the Buddha, for example, went to the divine realms in order to be able to preach the Dharma, although it wasn't visible his form in the world, he was still teaching continuously in this world and in worlds beyond. And of course this is possible because the Buddha has the magical legs of emanation, the ability to place bodies in many different worlds to preach the Dharma and benefit beings.
Yeah. And also this, we know the stories in the scriptures where the Buddha would kind of like disappear for a moment, and people would ask his disciples like Shariputra and Modgalyayana where he was, and they would answer, he's in this world or that universe preaching the Dharma. So they are totally unencumbered in their ability to benefit. So on this day, which is the anniversary of that conferring of the Nobel Peace Prize, we dedicate all our virtues, especially to real, meaningful peace being able to manifest in this world. And also to remind ourselves so that we can be inspired that just one being, in this case one person, His Holiness, is able to do so much to contribute to the peace and harmony in this world, so great things are possible. And if we do our practices, we will also become capable of being such a person who is able to bring great peace and happiness to the world. So we'll leave it here, and we will take questions. Does anyone have a question? Yes. Okay, so there's a couple people here, so we'll come to them, but don't worry, folks at home, we'll get to you as well. Go ahead. Yeah.
So we were talking about the 5 powers.
Yes.
Can we talk a little more about it?
Okay, yeah. Nanso top nga din so kareresta. Di da wuchi gyore duarwa. Yeah. So the power of force or projection. Power of the white seed. The power of complete eradication. The power of habituation. The power of prayers. So so for folks, Geshe actually gave, I think, 2 classes on all of these 5. So if you look at our previous videos, but also in the text itself, you'll see an extensive explanation. So the power of force is to create that force, that momentum, to be of continuous benefit to beings within one's life. That's one way of understanding the first. Yeah. So all of these powers are really to activate the positivity of our mind. So the power of the white seed, if we understand this in the simplest way, we can understand that the white seed are the potentials that we place through our practice of love, compassion, and bodhicitta. Those are like the white seeds within our mind. The power of complete eradication, really understanding that minds such as self-cherishing, such as anger and so forth, are negative, and that these are things that must be abandoned. Habituation, habituating ourselves to what is positive, and through that habituation strengthening the positive aspects. Prayers, so for example, prayers of dedication, that through the positive activities and practices that we've done, may these increase and flourish. Yeah, so Geshe said that if you want a really extensive explanation of this, I actually think he did the whole class on these 5 powers. You can look at the video. I can also email it to you. Yeah. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Appreciate it. So the question is, he was mentioning earlier the kind of wisdom, the value in noticing emotions early on.
Yeah.
Instead of doing them.
Yeah.
But then the situation arose that occasionally you
Yeah.
don't notice the emotion until it's too late and you have a wildfire.
Yeah.
It's kind of taking over your mind. What do you do then in that worst case scenario?
So I'm just going to read the question just so for folks at home can hear it. So he was asking about, we talked about sometimes we want to recognize that negative emotion, that affliction, as soon as it's arising, and in this way put it out. But sometimes, right, we don't notice it, and then by the time, for example, anger breaks out, it's like that wildfire, wildfire and it's way too powerful and there's nothing we can do. So like what do we do in such a situation? Nganso ngama di nyomong denso di shuk mepe kapula nganso lamsang mepa so tugire duas ine gen la jendak chik nganso samsam me barya nangshin halepe kontro shuk chempo legi duas tene chi traso nganso nyembo denso soya sheda mendus tutsa di kaplo la ya kandes chik sogores ane di mayong ya la kandes chik sogores.
다때 마용 알레 당길라바 노지 운중의 거자야. 바통바 tel라.
Loso.
세 돈용으로 돼 알레 다시 도고.
So the first step to kind of prevent those strong afflictions from arising is to train our mind in awareness. So we can start by cultivating mindfulness, for example, this practice of the 9 rounds of breathing and so forth. That'll be helpful to get that introspection. And also when we're angry, right, to practice the awareness of the breath. That can be something helpful. But if we try to practice an actual antidote like patience, we might not be able to do that right away. And so why is that the case? Because when we have a really strong, unwholesome mind within our consciousness, there's no space to put that wholesome mind in there, right? Our entire consciousness is kind of absorbed in that negativity. So it's said in the scriptures that for one person, for one object in the same moment, to have very strong compassion for them and very strong anger is not possible, right? Our mind can't do that. So what he would advise in the case of anger, when the anger is like that fire in our mind, we don't try to apply the actual antidote, but we try to get from anger to a point of maybe equanimity or to a neutral mind. And sometimes the best way to do that is just to kind of like slow down and focus our awareness on our breathing. And if we do that, the anger will lessen. So he would tell you, he would recommend you investigate the 4 foundations of mindfulness and how to kind of cultivate those in meditation. That might be very helpful. Yeah, so if we do that as the first point, cultivating the mindfulness of the breath, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, and then we apply compassion as the antidote to anger, you'll find it a lot more effective. And to prevent the anger from arising that strongly, the way to do this is we need to contemplate the negative aspects of anger, the faults of anger, cultivate an understanding of the benefits of patience, and if we kind of put energy into developing those understandings, we'll find we're more effectively able to deal with the anger. If we become really convinced about the negativity of anger and how upsetting it is for our mind, we'll develop a natural aversion to anger. And when we have that aversion to anger, we'll naturally be kind of motivated to learn how to be more patient. Yeah. So and this works with a lot of other principles as well. So for example, in the Lojong and in many other teachings, it says that if we contemplate the faults of samsara, of cyclic existence, the wish for liberation arises very naturally. But that's not so easy because most of us, we only see the benefits of samsara, right? It's very hard to see the faults, especially when things are going well. Yes. Anybody at home have any questions?
Edriba, there's a question from YouTube. Can I ask? Can you hear me?
Is anybody talking? Abhilash, go ahead. Can you talk? Because I can't hear you.
I am.
Hold on a second. Kesha's like, Kedrup's like an old man getting up and standing down.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, please go ahead again, Abhilash.
Can you hear me now?
I can, yeah.
Okay. So there's a question from YouTube, and I wanted to ask that to Geshe and Yusuf. How should one practice rejoicing in the good qualities of ourselves and others without inflaming pride?
Yeah. So how do we rejoice in the good qualities of ourselves and others without inflaming pride? Nanso soso gewa dinso jesui rangwa kandes gomgores karin ngagya mayong yagi tap dapochik dua.
소속 교환을.
Yeah, soso gewa jesui rang ngagya mayong yagi tap chikyo des.
야, 대도 요하러 와 소속 교환시에서는 더 버지서 요로 여보고. 이서 요로 여보고 자서 딘 리브데.
Yeah.
아까 센체 예로 봐. 리브 여보지 마와쇼 소노토나. 맞아 로시고 고쳐는 거라.
So one easy way when we're rejoicing in our own virtues is to prevent this becoming a cause of pride, is to think that may these causes of these virtuous things I do, may their results ripen upon others. If we wish for those positive causes we accumulated to ripen upon others, naturally that will be an antidote to pride.
하고서래 대용하시아 발라 예로 좋아지 요가만 되는 거 말이야. 예로 좋아야 보지 요나 하는 거 자시라 용거 말이야.
So, of course, if we are going to be able to do that, we have to have a real feeling for others so that we actually want to give our virtues to them. But Geshe said if we have this wish to give virtues to others, naturally we won't be prideful. So it all fits together.
다 들이서서는 도도지 요하래. 대마세 다 나자 매바테 다 단다도 개와야 보시 주세는 이나요. 니빠토 요메 다 토요는 다 해줘라. 니빠면은 가져서 설문디와.
So another thing to think was, okay, I was able to engage in this virtuous action for a time, and I did that well today, but do I have any realizations? Am I able to maintain that most of the time? And if you do have realizations, that's another thing. But as most of us don't, right, that may be a way to kind of soften our pride.
당에서 듣던 때는 시험기 강해치는 용무기 니빠나고 토요는 당가장인에서 그래요. 다 저런 연가자.
Geshe said if we look at our kind of general situation, there's not so much to be prideful about because we haven't even achieved something that will guarantee us never falling into unfortunate states of existence, much less like a spiritual realization.
다또 노진행 아주 데려와서 가자가 녀벌었더니 거쪽에도 거근에서 할래비 분감만 모여 대제선은 또 그래 내서 디사보 모여서 가자 차로.
Another thing can be to think about all of those Buddhist lists. That's actually given in the scriptures as an antidote. When we think about all of the Buddhist lists of the different constituents and phenomena and so forth, and then those things are so complex and it's like very hard to understand. This will, in a natural way, act to reduce our pride.
다 뚱바니 또 영에서도 또 산다 가져서나 제세대에서 여러분 다른 당 가져서 사기 시험만 되나고 싶은 거인 거로 왔어.
So Geshe said the interesting thing, like if we realized emptiness, maybe that's something to be prideful about. But once we've realized emptiness, there really isn't any basis for pride arising anyway. So it's like not something we need to worry about.
아치탄다만다 센체 강가로 따침보다 당길라바 노지 겨왔더니 파침바도에서는 또 나요 가져 줘야지 여러 왔어.
So but Geshe thinks especially that first method might be accessible for folks to cultivate feeling close to sentient beings, and then the positive things we do or the understandings that we have, dedicating the merit of that to their happiness rather than keeping it for ourselves.
Oh yeah.
Anybody else? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question if you'd like. Unusually quiet today. Is there anything? Yes, please go ahead.
With the afflictions, when, for example, as a generational affliction, let's say anger arises because someone's grandparents were afflicted and they passed down that affliction. When we are able to eradicate or soothe the anger, does that follow back the stream, and does it mean that because it is based on the karma that binds us to the grandparents, that it also soothes the affliction for those individuals? Like basically what I'm saying is, does the soothing follow the stream back towards the origination of the
Through the generational Sorry, Sam, to the generational source of that kind of habit of anger, like the grandparent or the parent, right?
Yeah. And does that reduce their affliction as well?
And does that, okay, yes, no, that's a good question. Did everyone hear the question? Okay, cool. So,
And then the second part I have after this one.
oh yeah, no, we'll come back to you, no problem. Let's get number one done first. Nganso di kongtro seria di ruwa samsam mirap gi gyunchi gyure. Perna nangmi yana nganso popo kongtro tsapo yana nganso pala kongtro tsapo chagures. Dene pala kongtro tsapo kadine sheshi tangi yana nganso yang kongtro tsapo chaya lelapore duas. Dene nganso di chö nyamlen chegin yana ruwa nganso di kongtro gi nyemik tang zoba gomne kongtro nyuru tang tubna nganso di kandeslau gre di drebu yapo di mirap ngomala yang pengire bes kechitrigi dua.
Mara nyemal yo pegere sena ani par yo pechra yo mares. Pena nganzo ngwa nyola tela.
Yeah, yeah.
Kusulo chesere.
Yeah.
Dipiga shewa kondo sar was yungya yo mare zala mares.
Yeah. So Geshe said from the Buddhist perspective, it would be hard to say this is the case because generations are not understood in the same way. So for example, like after that grandfather has passed on, they'll be in a different lifetime, right? And the lifetime that they're in at that moment might not have any family relationship to our current life, if that makes sense. And also, for example, when we practice taking the three bodies into the path in the context of Tantra, kusum lamkir di yangyur sundang?
Kusulo chega shewa pados mebazo karawas.
Yeah, yeah.
Mebazo yate.
Yeah.
Magumba de mato.
Yeah, yeah.
Magete zogo mare kondo sar.
Yeah. When we take the three bodies, death, intermediate state, and rebirth into the path, we're taking our future death, intermediate state, and rebirth into the path. We don't need to purify the previous death, intermediate state, and rebirth because those have all come before.
Ta ina yo ta tel ko gaya de karre sena. Ngamani jabi pacho dira momo yar was.
Yes. But when we practice those taking the three bodies into the path, what does that do in terms of those previous experiences? It can purify any bakchak, so any karmic latencies or imprints that may have been left behind. So in that way, it's kind of addressing the past. Yeah, so because those kind of imprints or latencies within our mind can still be a hindrance, then in this way, it's kind of important to address those. But Sam, if you want to come back and yeah, Geshe is wondering if we answered you. I think Geshe is saying that we can't really trace it back generations like that, but did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, but the affliction is dependent on its origination, and the origination crosses with the karma that is overlapped with that person who was the grandparent.
So you're saying that like no matter where grandpa is now, because there's that connection and dependent arising, if I do the practice that gets rid of that habitual tendency to anger, does he have some kind of karmic connection that will benefit him wherever he is?
Yeah.
I just wanted to sum up to make sure I'm understanding you, but if that's not what you meant, tell me. Is that more or less what you meant?
Yeah, that's exactly what I meant.
Okay, cool. I just wanted to make sure we're on the same page so I can get you your answer. Yine nganso di pala dang pola din so rwa, nganso di gyumje tanya po chik yores rwa, ane kongso kontrol lang ya di nganso kontrol lang ya gi kien dabo chik chagire duas, dene nganso di kontrol tets digpa dabo chik shana, kongso nganso dang legi gi drawa yutsang, kongso la tets pengi maribese gidu.
Ta tedo ngando jinga zo tole no lo zo to koro dewa chejula tene wo tende pedo yaris ngando deshi mo jagi.
Sorry, so Geshe said when it's asked this way, he would say, yes, there is some benefit. Because also keep in mind with the taking and giving, with the Tonglen meditation, those who we have a closer karmic connection with. So for example, family members, when we practice taking and giving on them, it's easier for us to be able to purify their negative karma. So if you think in that way, yes, it could be of some benefit.
lama teyo.
Yeah.
아니 다 단지진 좀 매우도 걸어서 ng에서 튀는 게 제시가 요할 때네. 야 숑바르지.
Loso.
저러가 까와데 아마 젠도 아던지 질는데 대산도 사 코코라 자네사 아마 자도 대지 보자 비슈스와스.
Ale, di dangdrawa karedu.
세시와스 코로코는 토모마이
Yeah.
미와지와스.
And these connections are very important because sometimes the person that we have the connection with is the person who can benefit us the most. You'll remember from Geshe-la's commentary on King of Prayers, right? That Sudana, the figure in that text, he went to like Manjushri and to like enlightened beings directly, and they said, I'm not the one to teach you, you need to seek out another teacher. And he went to 108 different teachers. That's because those who have the closest karmic connection with us are in the best position to help us often.
다 대도나 오나 뭐 땡데 요아레스. 렌데긴데 와 체줄라 때네. 둘레도나 요레 단다 된노지다.
So Geshe said from that perspective, because our family relationships are those close connections, when we practice Tonglen on them, it will be more powerful. But yes, if we kind of purify our anger and that habituation and also dedicate it to them who we inherited it from, that could also be very beneficial.
Thank you. I don't want to hold up everybody else, but one last question related to this. So does that mean if we go back to that knot of the dependent origination that created the affliction, let's say in me, and I heal the affliction in this lifetime completely, and that person who created the affliction is already in a future lifetime, does that affect that person in their lifetime as well?
Yeah, no, I'm going to translate this, but I can't say create the affliction, Sam, because somebody other than yourself can't create an affliction within you. They can be a cause, like they can be a contributing cause of it, right? But the substantial cause is you yourself. But I'm going to try to get you an answer. Let me see what I can do. Yeah, no worries. Nanso di kontro di pet mepaso tubna perna, right? Then nanso palayina. Popo yina, konso nganso kontrol nangyagi kien tso dapochik yina, nanso kontrol pangyadi konso la pengirebes, koronso maomba pang tubia, konso kontrol di mepaso tubia.
다 배드 배우 말에 세요 요 말에 다 쉬 첨보도 배우 말아 왔어 이나요 다 또래가 녀래도 다 드리잖아 때때서 배도 요요.
So Geshe said that our realization of that abandonment of anger, if we dedicate it to them, it can be of some benefit, but it can't be of great benefit. For example, if we abandon anger, they'll be able to abandon anger. But definitely they may get some residual benefit of it. Just like when we practice Tonglen with people who are close to us, we may be able to be a factor to help them purify some negative karma. But we can't transfer the realization. Yeah. And so that's why it's so important, right, to find skillful ways to try to benefit the people in our lives. And also why it's so important, if we want to benefit these people, that we really kind of think of them as we dedicate our merits. That's another way to benefit them. But definitely, like, in terms of transferring some merits, in terms of being of some benefit, this is easier to do with two types of people. Those who we have a body connection with, so that's a blood and bone connection with, that means our family members, and those with whom we have a dharma connection with, so our teachers and fellow practitioners. It's said to be easier in those cases. And it's said that actually, like with like family members or with people whom we have a dharma connection, when we accumulate merits and dedicate it to them while they're in the bardo, that can actually help them to have a favorable rebirth. So doing like a really powerful positive action while that person who is close to us is still in the bardo, dedicating it to their welfare. There's stories in the scriptures of how people would be able to have a more favorable rebirth because of that. Did we answer your question at least partly, Sam?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Maybe further discussion, I think. It's an interesting question. Any other questions?
Not at the moment.
Not at the moment. Nothing on Facebook.
아니 가서 키 롱게 용게야 대셈 저같이 도서 와서 나한테
Yeah.
용지 지었어.
Lonku.
그 정도는 롱게 용게야 이제 색깔을 해서.
Yeah. So Geshe said if there's no more questions, he just wants to end with one very short topic that came up in our previous sessions, which is what is the necessity of the Sambhogakaya or the enjoyment body?
다 뭐게 로빈니까 소사비까 전 같이 주면서 수비 좀 다 같이 주면서 써야 이미 이제 손지 쪼된데 집어를 마도 남는다랬어.
Loso.
다시 같이 주면서
Yeah.
같이 주면서 진짜 남는다요.
Ale. So it's related to the manifestation. Remember, we said that part of being able to become a Buddha is that you are accumulating the equivalent of 3 immeasurable kalpas worth of merit, of virtue. And Geshe said that some Buddhas, it's even said they accumulated 10 kalpas or like 18 kalpas, but you're Jipshu, or 40 kalpas. You are 40 eons, right? You are accumulating an immeasurable amount of merit. So it's related to that.
다 손지 쪼된데 그거 도모만 이미 체시지 같이 주면서 써야 돼.
So one of the specific characteristics of Buddha Shakyamuni, the Buddha of our world, was that he accumulated the merits of 3 immeasurable eons or kalpas.
다 던지지 제이니까 깔래 던지지 않는 또 전부 던지서 자 이산 리빈니까 그 만라와 던 로시에 주비께서 가디기나 대토라 가디기나 치도 도야지 거야.
So if you accumulate this immeasurable amount of merit as a cause, it has to have an unfathomable result, right? Because we understand that a result must be congruent with its cause. So the result of this unfathomable, unbelievable, extensive collection of merit manifests as an unbelievable result, which is a pure land, a pure realm, with a Buddha teaching continuously Dharma day and night without stopping in that realm.
하고서 다 이나요 대대나 거체 도고 쇼쇼세 바바 마도 돈도 마이자 드니 저께서 가진 것만 간절인데.
But because in many of the Pure Lands only Arya beings, or even within others only very highly elevated beings, are able to be reborn there, the Buddha has to manifest the Nirmanakaya, the emanation body, and manifest in our world.
다 가진 것만 간절 레리라고 자이 바스 대원 대화야를 다 나온다.
So Geshe said he gave a little bit of an easy answer last time, but he wanted to just give this little more expensive answer for you to chew on before we break for the day. Yeah, and this kind of more extensive explanation, Geshe was inspired to share it because he heard His Holiness share this recently. So a kind of vast or more vast perspective on what was shared already. So thanks very much, everybody. Be well. We'll leave it here. Tashi Dele. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Bye. Have a great day.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.